Do you believe in the de-dollarization theory, or do you just think enough people may believe in it that it could rocket gold?
The de-dollarization story is a process that's happening.
Ultimately, it kills your dollar, kills everything the dollar represents.
I think at this point, it's just a matter of collateral and liabilities, and gold is money good collateral.
What would it look like for the average American to lose the world's reserve currency status? Does the dollar automatically get put at a discount instead of a premium?
Obviously, they lose tax revenues when the yield gets paid, but the amount of funding that would go from domestic purchases, because if you just do the math, if taxes are taken out of the equation, all of a sudden these things are yielding 2 and 3%, yielding close to double digits in some cases.
Japanese invest in Japan. So they drop $40 billion on the market on the night of August 5th, and boom, they get $5 or $6 trillion worth of movement in the market.
This is the Futures Edge. I am Jim Uriel. That's Bob Iacchino. That is Tom Luongo, who is the writer of the Substack called Gold, Goats, and Guns, and the podcast Gold, Goats, and Guns. Brilliant guy. We're going to talk about gold, goats, and guns. Also, thank you people all for being here. Remember, our sponsor, Hardcore Italians. Please go to the website on our link. They make great clothing. You'll love the material. You'll love the funny sayings. If all of you aren't Italian, that's fine. We like you anyway. But chances are you know someone and buy gifts for people who are. And I think, Tom, maybe they have noticed that many of our guests are Italian. I don't know if we gravitate toward those. Luongo is Napolitan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what
yes, we are.
Yeah,
we are.
So one of my favorite ones, by the way, the Italian-American T-shirt.
I love that.
Yeah.
But the one I just got, Tom, that didn't get delivered yet, it just says, I got a guy with the Italian colors underneath, which, by the way, like I've been I got a guy my entire life. I didn't even know that was an Italian thing. I thought it was just a thing.
I got a guy.
Don't worry about it.
I live in the South. I've got a guy. His name is Brad. He's not Italian.
Right.
But,
my guy for construction is named Brad also, and he's not Italian, and he's a pain in the ass, but he's our guy. Yeah.
My guy Brad is awesome. He is your kind of classic good Southern black gentleman, and he hunts my property and gets me deer because he likes to hunt deer and not eat them, and I like to eat deer and not hunt them. So it's a beautiful relationship.
Match made in heaven.
And whenever I run into a problem, because I'm at the point now where I don't want to do any of the work around. I did all this work once. I don't want to do it anymore. So Brad, I need a guy, and he's like, I've got a family member. I've got this guy.
So my wife is
brilliant.
Not
Everybody
Italian.
needs a Brad. Everyone.
Yeah, my wife's not Italian. About 20 years ago, I come home from work, and there's a construction project going on in my front foyer or whatever, and I don't recognize the guys doing it. It's not my guys. And I was like, what's going on? She goes, we're replacing the tiles. Who's doing it? Whatever. I said, Margaret, let me explain to you the I got a guy system. You have to use the guy. You can't. Now we have to lie about it and say I did it myself or something like that, which is absurd. Right.
It was funny growing up with an Italian father who was always like, when he started making, middle class level money and wanted to do things to his house, he's always like, hey, I want to put up a fence. I got to find an Italian bricklayer. Like, you want a brick fence? Of course. Be like the block stones with the swirly things in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely.
The stone fence.
My grandfather, growing up, was a bricklayer in New York and owned a masonry supply shop on Northern Boulevard in Queens, and was forced into retirement at the age of 70 and had to liquidate his business and everything else because of Social Security. But and he didn't want to stop working. He was a miserable fuck, but he was still going at like 92. Had open heart surgery at 84. Like,
did you grow up in a multi-level? Like, did you live with your grandparents and stuff?
So I was born on Long Island. I was born in Freeport, and they lived over in Roosevelt. My grandparents, my mom's parents, lived over in Little Neck. But by the time I came around, my dad, who was NYPD, was like, "No, I don't like the direction of this neighborhood," and moved us all upstate. And so I grew up in the burbs up in Orange County, and my grandparents would come visit all the time, and we come down and visit them. Eventually, my grandfather had a stroke at one point, and they had to live with us for a few months, and things like that. But no, I lived in a basic bi-level in the burbs in upstate New York.
Bobby lived with his parents who were off the boat, spoke Italian in the house. My home that I grew up in was owned by my grandfather as well. So he and my father spoke Italian all the time. So it was very, very, I think, which, by the way, we moved from the Little Italy neighborhood in Chicago in 65 out to the suburbs, but so did half the freaking Little Italy neighborhood. On our block, there was 5 in Palatine. There was 5 off the boat Italian families. All the old men had their big gardens in the field. It was pretty funny. Yeah.
My neighborhood was similar. It was all Irish and Italian cops and firemen in my and commuting into the city. So
that's how your dad knew about it, right? Yeah, because someone else.
I don't know. This all kind of happened right that way. No, it was a brand new community in '68 when they bought the place. I was born in February, moved in June. They had contracted to have the house built probably in '67. Look around the neighborhood, and it was the Contalmos and the DeFelices and the this ones and the Nardos and the blah blah, and everybody was either Italian or they were Irish. There were a couple of Jewish families, and that was about it. But and most of them commuted into the city. They were either, like I said, cops or firemen.
Okay, so one last Italian question, then Bobby got the next question. Then we got to actually get to gold and things like that, like we like to talk about too. Growing up, because this is where I grew up, was a kind of a heavy mob influenced area. And we were discriminated against a bit because my mom, we worked at the rich kid school, so we could go there even we're from the little Dago ghetto. But they always thought we were beneath them, but they were always a little scared of us. But I did always think that the girls of the rich families maybe gave us an extra look because they know we'd piss off their parents if they ever brought us home. I liked the whole situation. I didn't mind that level. Did you have any similar experiences to that?
No, I was a dude. Look at what's behind me. I was a complete geek. Me and girls, I didn't know what to do with girls, and I went to college and didn't know what to do. I honestly, my wife and she was my first girlfriend, and I've been with her.
That's awesome.
About 32 years now, and
same with me.
Be 33 in February. So
33 for me in May.
I didn't have that issue. My dad kept. This is my birds and the bees talk with my dad as I came home from college. That's the first year I was working for him at, working maintenance at the local psychiatric hospital. My mom was head of nursing, and dad was retired NYPD at that point and ran the maintenance department. He just kind of looked at me one morning over a cigarette and a cup of coffee and said, "So, you getting any?" I'm like,
oh God!
That was my dad.
I dropped that.
That was my dad. So I just kind of looked at him and went, "No."
Am I supposed to be?
I was, yeah, but I wasn't. So
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, my father started the Calabrese Baking Company in Chicago. And the interesting thing about that, if you read the book Family Secrets, which, Jimmy, I don't know if you've ever read that.
That's the one about bringing down the mob, right?
Yeah, it is phenomenal.
I know the guy. I know the Hake, the lawyer who went undercover for 5 years.
Yeah, so Frank Calabrese Sr. and Frank Calabrese Jr. and Nick Calabrese Frank Calabrese Sr. ran like what they called the Chinatown crew, which was really not limited to Chinatown. It was also bled into Cicero, which I grew up sort of on the northwest side. And that's where they were influential. And we had the Calabrese Baking Company. And at the height of it, we had 16 delivery trucks on the street. There was zero chance anyone thought that my father named it after Calabria, which is where we were from, which is exactly what he did. So everybody that saw the trucks and saw us getting in out of the trucks, they're like, Frank Calabrese, Nick Calabrese.
Oh, yeah, they thought they were the mobster trucks. Oh, yeah.
They thought it was. And I have another story relative to those guys that I tell you guys off the show, but not on the show.
Okay, let's get. I've seen some of your tweets of the last couple of days involve gold, involve talking about the potential de-dollarization, nonsense or not nonsense. Right. Bobby and I have been gold bugs, almost you'd call us, for how much we've talked about it over the last 2 years, and fundamentally why we want to own it, and fundamentally it's done pretty damn well. Do you believe in the de-dollarization theory, or do you just think enough people may believe in it that it could rocket gold? What do you think?
The de-dollarization story is a process. I did a whole panel with Alex Craner and Bob Murphy for the upcoming Expat Money Show about this very topic. And we all came to the same conclusion, which is this is just part of the process. I think the Fed wants this. I don't think the Fed wants the global reserve currency burden anymore. I think there are other factions within the U.S. government that do want it. It's just a matter of like collateral and liabilities, and gold is money good collateral, and for everyone. It's, for central banks, for you, for me, for everyone else. And at the end of the day, and it becoming a tier one capital asset, and with Basel III changing the rules even more so in gold's favor, it's going to be a mechanism by which, this is something that people just don't want to admit, but gold is a mechanism by which the central banks and our governments that are over levered can get themselves out of their fiscal and unfunded liabilities problem if they're willing to do the hard work in the long run, which is, fix the fiscal scene up on Capitol Hill and allow the price of gold to rise so that the percentage of our central bank balance sheets is, are collateralized with real assets versus debt that that in short order, no one's going to want unless we fix things, right?
Right.
So
You said something that flipped a switch. Because I never considered before that perhaps the Federal Reserve doesn't want the burden of being the world's reserve currency. Let's say we lost that status, and I know people who are listening, I don't think you lose it every night, particularly overnight, particularly when other central banks are obsessed with the same sort of ridiculous stewardship of their currency spending, whatever. We're still the world's tallest midget, which I have a lot of experience being. But the point is that, thanks for the smiles, boys. But the point is that what would it look like for the average American to lose the world's reserve currency status? Does the dollar automatically get put at a discount instead of a premium?
It's a good question. I think it just changes. I think we're actually moving into a much more complicated world. I think we're moving towards a world of, we're never going to close our capital account relative to gold flows or anything like that. Not officially. Vince Lanci and I, another good Italian, have talked about this at length about how, we're going to put soft capital controls on the flow of physical gold, and we're going to have I think we're going to wind up with, like everybody else, a two-tiered monetary system, an international dollar and a domestic dollar. And I don't know all the mechanisms and all the twists and turns of how we get there, guys, but I think that's clearly where a lot of this is going to wind up. When I think about, like, for example, and that this is to answer your question, Jim, in that, like, it may not change very much for the average American at all if we do it right. Meaning, so what if we embrace Judy Shelton's idea of like a gold-backed TIPS or a gold-covered Treasury bond, where we pay maybe a partial coupon in dollars and then pay out at the back end of the bond with a certain percentage in gold, right? So we pay a 2% coupon on and 5% gold cover clause or 10% gold cover clause. But it's only saleable to American citizens, not international investors or anybody else. Only Americans can buy it, and they can only use it. And maybe we even issue a kind of digital dollar issued by the Fed that would be that you could buy these with, right? Oh my God! Like all of a sudden, like the boogeyman of the quote unquote central bank digital currency and all this other stuff, that changes the mechanisms of. Again, I'm not free free associating here. I'm thinking about, I've had a long conversations with a lot of people about how you can do this stuff and recapitalize what's the United States and draw capital back in, or more appropriately, the wealth that we generate here stays here. And it starts with, admitting that we have a fiscal problem. In recent days, I've really been thinking about this. I'm like, everybody, whenever I say, well, let's just fix the budget, let's just cut $1 trillion out of the budget, everybody goes, well, we can't do that. GDP would collapse. I'm like, why not? Do you really think we don't spend $1 trillion overseas every year?
Spend it on nonsense. We could cut back $1 trillion without even. Yes, right. We won't.
Well, I don't know. Okay, well, here's the thing. The official GDP numbers would drop by $1 trillion because we'd spend that money. We wouldn't spend that money. But domestically, the American economy wouldn't change at all, because that $1 trillion is money that's spent overseas, for the most part. I mean, okay, some people would lose their jobs and blah, 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 blah. Okay, maybe a 10 or maybe 50 or $100 million would fall out of the economy, or maybe 500 million or whatever. Maybe a 5 billion. Who cares? It's nothing. It's a drop in a bucket relative to our GDP. We could cut $1 trillion from the budget, and only 10% of the domestic, and only 10% of that would hit the domestic economy. And we would more than make that up from, the lack of that fiscal spending being levied as taxes and all the rest of it. So there's so many ways to skin this cat of how to get out of this. The question is whether we're willing to do so or not. And we're certainly not going to have that happen under Kamala Harris. But I think that we're starting to really see some movement at the edges about what the plan is and who Trump has got around him and whatnot. I think we're beginning to see that is part of the plan. And that has certainly our European partners very, very worried because they don't want that at all. They want their free, cheap euro dollars, and they want the Fed acting as the central bank of the world for their benefit, not for ours.
I have so many things I want to ask you based off of what you just said, but I want to try and just stick to this one. I'm trying to take notes. I can't take them fast enough to remember my questions, but
Sure.
in terms of de-dollarization, somebody asked me the other day if I believed it was going to happen, and it happened to be the father of a couple has a newborn baby that we're friends with. This baby's 6 months old, and I said, "Look, your daughter's going to have a 40th birthday, but I ain't going to see it." That's what I think is de-dollarization. It's going to happen, but I'm not going to see it. Right, now, that may mean 40 years from now, which should concern you for your kids and your grandkids to a certain degree, depending on how we do it, like you just said. Do you guys think I'm nuts in saying that? And then the second part, and this for both of you, and the second part of the question is, obviously the Brics. It's my view that affecting Russia's ability to enter the SWIFT banking system is accelerating de-dollarization. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say, right?
Nope.
When we kick them off SWIFT, the rest of the world goes, wow, they can do that shit to us too. We better start having a backup plan. Now you look at BRICS, South Africa's in BRICS, right? There's another African, Egypt is in BRICS. There might be another African nation. South Africa is a huge gold producer. Like Ghana is a huge gold producer. Do you think they could somehow capture that gold production to assist in their sort of gold backing and reduce the gold production available to the rest of the world, thus boosting the price of something the three of us own?
Yeah. You don't think that's part of the?
That's all I need.
You don't think that? You don't think that that's part of it? Of course. What it is that it's this. In order for the gold trade, which has been centered in Chicago and London and Zurich, to move to other places, now Dubai. Notice that the UAE is also in the BRICS. Very important linchpin here. They're going to be the freaking London of the BRICS. Let's make it easy, or the Zurich of the BRICS. But in order for that to happen, you have to build the entire infrastructure. You have to have the vaulting. You have to have the supply chain for handling that amount of gold. And then, of course, you have to have Russian ports. In places like Ethiopia, you have to have, and
Ethiopia is the other country in the BRICS. By
Ethiopia is a very important cog in this as well. So
yeah, they're another country in BRICS.
And then you've got all of this, and then once the gold is mined and refined and bought, and then it can move, and then as long as there's a supply chain to bring it back to where it needs to go, yeah. And as the Brits were saying, there's Bob's your uncle, and you've got a supply chain, and then you can move that market somewhere else. At the same time, as Vince has talked about it, you can see that he thinks, and I don't disagree with him, that the COMEX and the LBMA are being purposefully drained. Like in the United States, we're moving away from using the COMEX as a means by which to set the gold price at the margin, and we want to move that into GLD and SLV. In that way, because they don't actually have any physical delivery. I mean, unless it goes to a trusted intermediary, which in this case would be JP Morgan, right? And JP Morgan is going to do whatever the government or tells them to do, and it's going to be negotiated off exchange transactions between the United States and any gold we produce or any gold we have, and another entity, and it's going to be a negotiated political settlement. Whereas if you want to speculate on the price of gold, and you need to, for FX reasons, you can use GLD and options on GLD and SLV, and there you go. And then we can just take that out of the market, because that's so much of the actual gold and silver activity on the COMEX, and then to a lesser extent now the LBMA. That's the way I think and again, that creates a kind of two-tiered gold system as well, right? There's the physical market, which is tightly controlled, and there's the futures market and the FX speculation market for people to be able to hedge their FX risk and all that stuff. So that stuff just makes that it's clear that that's where we're headed, and you can see why these things are. So all these little bits and pieces are happening. The BRICS are putting together their supply chain so that they have a steady supply of gold, so that the central banks in each of those countries can settle their trade on a quarterly or annual basis. They're going to use this thing called the unit. They're going to announce it next month at Kazan at the BRICS summit. But we have a bunch, but the BRICS themselves have a bunch of people who are, sniping, who are of what's the word I'm looking for? Dubious loyalty to the Brics itself.
Yeah.
You've got Lula in Brazil now. You've got South Africa and their relationship with Israel over the International Court of Justice, the genocide thing. You've got the Brits are clearly putting pressure on India, all through that, on Modi, and there's all sorts of fingerprints of British perfidy and MI6 perfidy all over India, and the amount of schmoozing that the Brits are doing by putting Indians in places and positions of power all around the world in order to, extend their soft power into those areas. So, what did I see this morning? The Duran just did a video, the title of which is, you've got India and Brazil are both putting pressure on Russia for a peace settlement in Ukraine, and what I'm seeing from the Telegram channels are the Russians have finally just started a massive attack and overrunning Ukrainian positions. And this has happened in the last 24 hours. So you got Putin's answer there. He's not backing down, and he shouldn't, because he's winning and on the ground. And then there's another whole side of this thing where you guys should speak to my friend Alex Craner if you have not, by the way. If you have not spoken to Alex Craner about what he's uncovered about the UK gilt market and the liabilities that the Bank of England have and outstanding, or listen to the podcast that he and I did on my podcast. And he's a brilliant researcher and a brilliant commodities guy and all of that. When you start to put those pieces together, you realize that the Brits are they're on the hook as guarantors to the World Bank for most of Ukraine's debt. Wow. They're still, they lost the Bank of England in the gilt crisis of 2022, which cost Liz Truss her job. They traced it down. It's something like $160 billion that the Bank of England lost. Guess who's on the hook to bail out the Bank of England for that money that they lost? It's the British people. The British government, Parliament, has to buy off the debt of the Bank of England. The Bank of England and the British government is subordinate to the Bank of England. So now you've got 40, 60, 80, $100 billion. God knows how much in liabilities, guaranteed liabilities, that the Brits have gotten themselves, over the bus on, or, are in trouble on. And Ukraine is now in technical default. This is what Alex has uncovered. He put the timeline together. Ukraine got a 2-year moratorium at the beginning of the war on all their debt repayments. That expired on August 1st. In the lead up to that, Zelensky was, addressing Parliament and meeting with the British cabinet, the British minister of cabinet, the cabinet ministry, which never happens, by the way. A foreign leader meeting with those people only happens every half a century or whatever. Oh, by the way. And they're trying to figure out, well, what can they do to, negotiate a haircut on the loans and everything else. And then they negotiate, and then Zelensky turns around and says, we ain't paying anyway. And then 3 days after that, Fitch downgrades them from CC to C, which is technical default. Right. We're in crazy town territory at this point. We could lose the entire city of London. LIBOR's going away. All this stuff is happening all at the same time. So someone needs a war to guarantee the bond payments, and they need the Russians to pay reparations, which is why the Europeans keep talking about the Russians paying for rebuilding Ukraine. It ain't going to happen, because Russia's going to win the war on the ground, unless we are dumb and Kamala Harris wins the presidency and forces us to go to war. But then again, even Lloyd Austin just told Zelensky at Ramstein 2 days ago, dude, you're not getting any more long-range missiles from us. You're not getting any more support. We're not giving it to you. You don't and then Blinken goes out there today and says, oh, no, we're giving them, the State Department is giving them the permission to strike deep within Russia, but the Pentagon's saying no. This is the world we live in today, guys.
So, by the way, sounds to me like you're describing a short the British pound, maybe even short the euro, and long gold. As Dennis Gartman would say, be long the gold in pound terms. That's the kind of trade you're diagramming, right? And then I have an answer to Bobby's question too. What's that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I haven't even gotten into Japan yet.
Okay. Oh, God. We got a lot on that. We've covered them. Yeah. There's some things. But first of all, I wanted to address a couple things, because there's one thing that I don't know if this is a disagreement, but I think you said something mildly that I don't think is going to happen, because you talked about the fact we could just stop spending $1 trillion overseas. I think the kickback grift is so deeply entrenched. And I think it's more entrenched on one side of the aisle than the other, but it's deeply entrenched on both. And there's a lot of people getting wealthy. Just because you bring in a new administration, there's still a lot of people who are involved in getting the kickback. So what do we think when we give, $400 million to Iran, my assumption is that 20% of it winds its way back into the politicians' pockets who approve that. I don't think that is unreasonable or any tinfoil hat wearing bullshit to think that. You don't either, right?
No. What I'll say, Jim, when I say something like that, I'm talking about like, hey, let's cut the budget of USAID.
Right.
How about that?
Let's
stop funding color revolutions around the world. How about we close some of the bases? How about we do some of that stuff? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, the big stuff.
But that's what we would do if the three of us, the three reasonable, actual, logical, balanced thinkers were in there. But the people who are in there now, I'm not sure if they have that ability at all, too. But I like everything else I like everything you're saying, particularly what I just thought about, because I am short the euro right now. I'm not sure why. It was a technical pattern that triggered. But I want a fundamental argument to back that up. And I might be short more of sterling and long gold as well, because I think gold is the trade. Let's say Trump wins. He's reasonably big domestic spender. Maybe he does cut back some of that international budget, and maybe the grift will get curtailed a little bit too. But in the past, he has been a relatively ride in on a white horse and save every industry by writing a check with our money. I don't love that particularly. So I think he's mildly inflationary, will be good for gold. Kamala Harris, I think, will be terrific for gold. Just restrict the economy through onerous regulation, while at the same time the Fed has to stimulate into the teeth of still some remaining inflation. And I think that would be an excellent story for gold. So again, gold is one of my bigger positions. I've been long that quite a bit. That was all I said in response to Bobby's question. I know I had a question, but in this year that I'm going to be turning 60, I forget that shit quickly. Bobby?
Well, yeah, I have another question for both of you. And this is sort of not stealing this, but I wanted your guys' opinion on this because it blew my mind when it was said, and it also blew my mind that no one's ever said it. Steph Pomboy, right?
Love her.
Yeah, spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, and she said she had an idea to help domestically recapitalize the country and the Treasury. And she said she was uncomfortable kind of saying it because she really kind of wanted it to get to Trump. And she said, so I'm just not sure. I've reached out to a couple of people I know that know him, and I'm trying to get it to him because I don't want anyone to just kind of take it from me and this and that. A couple of weeks later, I see her on Charles Payne's show, and she says it. And I'm like, I texted her. I'm like, oh, my God, you said it. She goes, yeah, I just figured I should get it out there on the record.
By the way, this is a hell of a buildup. You're a media star. This is buried in the lead. Way to go. 20 years. I am, I'm Team Bobby.
It's really
right now.
because I wear hardcore Italian shirts, which of course are very quality T-shirts, and they have me, standing up.
If you want hardcore Italian shirts, the link on our whatever.
Yeah, use our link so that we get supported. She said she thinks, even if it's just temporary, but it should be long-term temporary, U.S. Treasury should be tax-free like munis are to domestic purchasers, institutional and otherwise. And I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought of that because obviously they lose tax revenues, when the yield gets paid. But the amount of funding that would go from domestic purchasers, because if you just do the math, if taxes are taken out of the equation, all of a sudden these things are yielding 2% and 3%, yielding close to double digits.
Yeah.
In some cases. What do you guys think of that? I think it's brilliant, but you guys are more interest rate guys than I am.
Tom, you go first.
Yeah, you go ahead. No, Jim, to call me an interest rate guy is hilarious, by the way.
So I am an interest rate guy. I love this. I love this idea. It encourages them to be domestically held. It's always been a little bit of a liability when so much of our debt is held in foreign sovereign funds. I think it's fantastic. Anything that keeps tax money from going to the federal government, I support 100%. I think their problems come from too much money, not too little. Bobby?
So, Tom, here's the question to you then. Where are the traps I'm missing on this? Can you see any right now, or do you want to call me next week, or where are the traps?
No, I don't think so. I think she's describing a version of what I've been describing. Mm-hmm. So I just went directly to gold back tips and gold cover clause. I'm going back all the way to Jim Sinclair in 2005 when I'm talking about shit like this, right? No, I think that's exactly the right way of going about it. We need to incentivize American investment in America. Like we need to do Like, again, I'm going to go back to Japan. How does Japan do what they do, and how have they been able to get away with what they've done? Well, they've done it by making sure that Japanese invest in Japan. The Japanese love investing in Japan. Mr. and Mrs. Watanabe would rather give their money to Japan, even if they're only making 0.1% real yield or 0.2% real yield. They don't care. As long as it doesn't turn negative real yield on them, they're going to stay in the trade. The hard part for them is that since they're a big exporting nation, you got to get their corporates to repatriate their profits that are sitting in American banks and Mexican banks and Europe and everything else. So that's why, for example, I always knew that the BOJ was eventually going to defend the yen. And when they defended it, they were going to get the maximum amount of money bang for their buck, and they were going to let the leverage within the yen carry trade do most of the talking for them. So they dropped $40 billion on the market on the night of August 5th, and boom, they get $5 or $6 trillion worth of movement in the markets. That's how you make, and then that's how you get good return on your investment. And notice that the yen, after it first dipped to 141 that day, and then rebounded to 148 or so, and it was against the dollar, and there was a lot of dollar liquidation of dollar yen carry trades. And I said at the time, that's bounce. That's the first order effect. The second order effect is going to be when it goes against the euro and the pound. And you're watching it today. The yen is today trading at 142. The euro has bounced off of 112 back down to 110, and the pound has rolled over back to 130 after hitting 133. UK-US bond spreads rising, meaning gilts are being bought slower than than U.S. Treasuries. Same thing with Germans. Same thing with German spreads. They're all collapsing after all this time of everybody trying to hold everything in a nice tight yield band and a currency band. The currency markets are changing. The yen's going into the 120s, high 120, going back to like 125. I think it's going back to 125, and it's going to take the euro and the pound with it. Why? Because the Swiss are no longer bailing out the euro. Also, the euro Swiss franc cross has collapsed, has started to move back towards the Swiss franc. So all of that tells you that we've got liquidity turmoil happening in Europe and in the UK gilt market. You've got the Bank of Japan acting as the Fed's wingman to cut dollar liquidity globally, while the Fed now is signaling, we're going to cut interest rates and help out the starving credit markets domestically. We've got SOFR, LIBOR's going away, and we've got it all ring fenced. And if the foreign central banks need U.S. Treasuries, they got to come to us because they can't go to our domestic repo markets because our banks have all told them to go fuck themselves. Their bunds are not worth. We're not taking them at par. We'll take them at 70 cents on the dollar, and of course they can't afford to do that. That's been going on for 5 years now, and so going back to the repo crisis of 2019, J.P. Morgan started that trade. And now all the American banks are doing it. So, yes, we've set up a virtuous cycle to bring the treasuries home, to bring the dollars home, to put them back on the bank's balance sheets. And we're also enticing or forcing anybody who wants to maintain current credit spreads to buy the top. Look at where the markets are priced right now for a 75 basis point cut next week, and we're not going to get that. Powell's going to give us maybe 50. He wants to do 25, and so what do you think is going to happen when that happens? If he comes in and he disappoints the markets, how are all these spreads that have been carefully constructed and are still starting to break down? What do you think is going to happen then? It's going to be a massive secondary wave of capital inflow into the U.S. So if we want to do this right, there are multiple ways of having the United States recapitalize itself by simply just acting normally, like a country that actually cares about itself, with monetary and political leadership that cares about the United States first and the United States banking system. It's the only thing that makes any sense.
So can
there's 18 different ways of doing this. Pick one or two and do two of them.
So earlier in the show I said I was short the euro, but I'd like to change my answer, and you guys who are listening just give me like credit for all the shit he just said as my fundamental reason for being short the euro, because I agree with you on that.
So what you're saying is you're Texas hedged the euro now.
Exactly right. Yeah. So we're all good then. So here's what I like: your idea versus Steph's idea. Your idea is probably ultimately better, but Steph's idea is probably easier to implement. Don't
Absolutely.
you agree? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Great.
so that is interesting because too, one of my base cases, and I want you to comment on this too. My base case has been that it's great. The Fed is draining its balance sheet. Everything seems wonderful. It's taking $2 trillion off, but everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. 6 out of the last 10 long-term auctions have disappointed. Some significantly so when we go to auction off Treasury bonds. My base case has been that if that ever starts to get out of hand, the Fed quickly pivots from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing and boosts balance sheet again. At that point in time, I think it's not sayonara for the dollar. I hate being hyperbolic or dramatic, but it could be a significant move lower and higher and all the shit that's denominated in dollars. The point is, if you put Steph's thing in there too and increase domestic organic demand, and if that goes for companies too that can invest in U.S. Treasuries and have them be tax-free, I think that's a brilliant plan and could do an end around for the problem I see potentially happening. Do you like that?
I agree completely, Jim. I'll go one step further and say, oh, I had a plan, and I got punched in the face. That is my brain sometimes just kind of locks up.
Same.
That is one of the issues. Here's the gig. Powell will only intervene if the bond market seizes up. That's his job. He will not intervene if the stock market seizes up. He does not care. Okay. He does not care. Never has, never will. The Fed cares about the bond market and the Treasury market. So you have to ask yourself, okay, so what are the potential pitfalls to force that to happen? And why would somebody strategically try and make that happen? Because that's what they want to do. So can you see no one accepting the results of the election?
Sure.
Right. So that's going to be the black swan that's kind of out there saying, okay, we know what they're going to do over. That's what's on the Gantt chart over at Evil Corp Central. That on November 6th we start the no way Trump didn't win the election. We're going to secede from the union. Kamala Harris is still the president. We're not going to give up power. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We're going to turn America into France. We're going to have Macron lose the election twice and still have the government that he wants.
Yeah.
Right. So this is that'll be prima facie evidence that we're ruled by feckless European communists and not anything else. So that
you make a mention, is that WEF you're talking about there, like Klaus Schwab?
It's just Davos and the EU and all those.
That whole gang.
That whole gang. I call them. I go from. Remember, I started the whole Davos meme, right? So it's really funny that everybody now reflects it back at me. So I'm kind of like shifting into like Evil Corp Central because it doesn't really matter if it's the old European money or if it's the old Jews or this one. It doesn't matter. It's those people, and it's a whole group of them, and they're transnational and they don't care. And some of them are Russian, and some of them are Chinese, some of them are from Hong Kong, and some of them are from Singapore, and some of them are Indian, and some of them are American, and some of them are Panamanian. It doesn't really matter. Right? At the end of the day, it's that the globalist impulse to continue the colonization grift that's been going on, centered out of the industrial West for 600 years. It's just the same people. And it doesn't really matter, which one's leading the charge or not leading the charge. So, and that is what that's what we're fighting. And the question that's going to be laid in front of everybody's feet in November is, who do you actually work for? And we know who Eric Swalwell works for. He works for the Chinese. We know who Nancy Pelosi works for. We know who these people work for. But there's going to be a manila folder like slapped on their desk if Trump wins the election. Or even better, there's a massive move in the Senate, like 3 or 4, couple of seats in the Senate that no one's predicting. And the House. And even if the presidential election is, not determined until, freaking March or whatever, I don't even care about that. If that happens, everybody is going to have to kind of look at it like, well, they've been paying me, but, manila folders hit their desk and now all of a sudden there's the compromat with them, the Chinese agent or the they can't pass the dead hooker live boy test or whatever is going to happen. And that's when everything starts to change. And just watch what's going to happen in November. There's going to be the sounds of millions of millifolders hitting people's desks, and a lot of people were suddenly silent, to quote, to crib Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's what I'm waiting to see if that happens, depending on how the election plays itself out.
I want to get into policy. By the way, we think Kathy Hochul works for the Chinese government too now, right? Governor of New York. Back to Steph's things real quick, and then I want to get to policy because this is something I kind of want to end the show with.
Sure.
You talked about the stock market and Powell not caring about it. If you make U.S. Treasuries tax-free, Tina gets shot in the face, right? There is no alternative. Basically, gets shot in the face. Yeah. So she's dead. And now does that, I don't want to say collapse the stock market, but does it force U.S. companies to get a lot better in terms of earnings, and does it damage the stock market when you've got all this money rushing into tax-free treasuries?
Sure.
Taking away that passive bid all the time, that just everyone monthly buys just whatever stocks they can. I think that's probably a good thing. I'm not confident that effect would go for very long, because market equilibrium will take over. If the demand is really what we're anticipating, they'll push it up, drop the yields, and it might not be that great of an effect, but it certainly will be in there, and I like it. Sure.
Well, that was going to be the other thing I said. If it pushes down yields, pushing up price with all that demand, now you got the companies that are benefiting on that, the dollar's benefiting from that, and so on. It's just an overall boost to the U.S. economy. But I want to tell a quick joke because it comes from our friend John DeSorga, who is the person who introduced Tom and me. He just reached out to me and he said, "You got a minute to talk?" And I sent him a picture of the show. And he goes, "Look at that murderer's row of Italian. Tell this joke. How many Italians does it take to change a light bulb? One, to hold it in place because the world revolves around them anyway."
Right. Right. Exactly. How many jazz musicians does it take to change a light bulb? Fuck the changes, man. Just play. Like, the world does revolve around us because we are the smartest guys in the room. And
by the way, there has never been a president with an Italian last name. And by the way, I always joke about this.
No one points that out.
What's that?
No one ever points that out.
No one ever points that out, because we are still viewed little bit as shysters, people who go around and people who always got a game, which, by the way, I am a little bit of a shyster and I do always got a game, so maybe it is appropriate, but I don't like it. I don't like other people thinking that, but that's just my input there.
There's the other problem with Catholics as well. Like we still have there's a lot of this, and
but there's like 6 Irish named presidents. They are all Catholic.
Catholic-ish.
Catholic, ish. And then there's Eisenhower, who was an atheist, and they had made him write Presbyterian now because it's like not having a religion anyway. True story, actually. So, I don't know. It's funny. Like, as far as the stock market is concerned, we have to keep in mind global capital flow. Let's look at what's happening in Q3. It was one of the things I point out to my people on a regular basis. And I do the Dow every Wednesday and every Sunday. And now I've started to put up a little chart of the Dow's performance relative to other major indices. In the first half of the year, the Dow was one of the worst performing major indices in the world. And it was underperformed the DAX, it underperformed the NASDAQ, it underperformed the Nikkei, it underperformed the Euro Stoxx 50, it underperformed even emerging markets. I use EEM, the EEM ETF as a good proxy for that. In Q3, the numbers have all turned. The Dow is by far the best, is holding up the best. If not in Q3, it's still up. Everything else is negative. Yeah. Everything else is in negative territory. The DAX is barely hold on to like a positive 0.3%. That'll change tomorrow. And that's a classic Martin Armstrong blue chips. Foreign capital rushes into U.S. blue chips because they need to move in and not move price kind of argument. If treasuries get too expensive, as Bob pointed out, and Jim pointed out, like you guys both pointed out, like people move into Dow stocks if the yields are above the 10-year yield. Like, you know what I mean? So they'll do it. And it'll just be a massive in wave of capital into the U.S. And all the world is asking for is for us to stop acting like jackasses. That's really it, folks. I mean, and there's so much gaslighting and propaganda that the United States is on the verge of collapse. And I think it's all bullshit. I think it's gaslighting by morons. It's gaslighting by evil pedophiles, frankly. And that's where we are. And, once you push through that and look at what's actually happening, you realize that the market sentiment hasn't really changed. And they understand that, if the U.S. can, kind of unscrew itself politically and get on its own and start turning the ship around, then we can solve all these problems. Well, we cut a deal with China. Trump will cut a deal with China in a heartbeat. Russia, same thing. He'll cut a deal with all the people. They know that. And you can even see it's all kind of laying out there. Xi wants a deal. He doesn't want to go to war with us over Taiwan. They don't even want to go to war.
Nobody wants to go to nuclear war. Nobody wants to get that far. Nobody wants to go to war at all. So,
other than the Brits, they want everybody else to fight.
They want everybody else to fight.
Don't ever forget that.
I want to ask you a question. We're recording.
France just surrendered, by the way, just because I was talking about it. Anyway, you go on.
That's a 20th century
glass bottom joke. A glass bottom boat joke. Why did the new French Navy have glass bottom boats so they could see the old French Navy?
How do you sink an Italian submarine? You put it in water.
This is just
open
great
up the screen doors.
That is great stuff. So I want to ask you, because we're recording on it's a couple hours before the debate, 2-3 hours before the first debate, right? Presidential debate. Now, I've always maintained that who is president doesn't matter. Who runs Congress matters more. And if Congress is actually working, matters more. I think I might be changing my tune on this particular election simply because of all the international issues going on. So, Tom, number one, Nate Silver, who leans left, right? If you read his Substack, I subscribe to his Substack. He leans very left, is one of the only pollsters. Well, I should say he hates Trump. I don't know if he leans left, but he does not like Trump. And he's one of the only pollsters that have changed his model after 2016. As we talk right now, has Trump at a 64.4% probability of winning. Okay. And he said the debate could move it in one direction or the other, but he thinks after the debate, probably be closer to 70% probability for Trump. Although he says Harris is probably a better debater because she was a prosecutor. What do you think the outcome of the debate will be, can be, could be?
Let's start with the beginning. Trump demanded that they stand up. Taller candidate wins. He's 6'4", she's 5'2".
Okay.
It's going to be a big deal. He has to come across as not being a bully. Okay. He has to come across as reasonably coherent. Now, he has problems with that every once in a while because he's Trump. And his brain just flits in every damn direction. He's not senile. He's still sharp. He's just Trump, and he wanders. I think that he can't bully her in public. I think that will be a bad look because Harris is an unknown quantity. Unlike Hillary Clinton, everybody knows she's a rapacious bitch. Bullying Hillary was the right strategy. And it was going after Hillary and pushing her buttons and getting her on tilt was the right strategy. Harris, all he has to do is just as you said, I'm just going to let her talk. Right. And then all he has to do is come in with his policy game on, high and just say, look, we're not going to do anything terrible. We're just going to make the country better. That's all we're going to do. And all this, all this fear mongering, that's all just nonsense. And it's nonsense because she doesn't even believe it. Look at her. Come on. And I think if he does that, he'll have no problem. I'm not a huge fan of Nate Silver, but then again, I haven't really followed him since 2016. I've always thought that he's a DNC operative. But, maybe like everything else, I don't know. He's seeing the light, whatever. I don't know. I don't think it much matters. What matters is, are we outside the margin of cheating? And it's still going to come down to 5 states and 5 counties within 5 different states. And that's going to determine the election. And that's where all the effort's going to be to move the goalposts. And the big question is, are we going to see an outsized movement in states that we don't think are in play? And I'm going to target Virginia as one of them. When Glenn Youngkin changed the rules that demanding that all the ballots be certified effectively. What if the permanent state in Virginia is not happy with the concept of another Harris presidency? What if we've had a shift within those institutions that normally, but we're all used to the idea that Virginia's red until the last 5% are counted up in the northeastern part of Virginia. But ever notice that it's always the same thing? We get 98% of Virginia. They call it blue, and then the numbers come in, and they stop counting for 2 hours. I got news for you. I live in Florida. I used to watch them do that shit in Broward County. They would start counting Broward and Dade. Then they would stop. They'd wait to see what the Panhandle did, and then they'd go, okay, well, we need to manufacture this number of votes in Miami, Dade, and Broward, and then and if they could manufacture those votes, they manufactured the votes, and they called it for whomever they called it for the Democrat, and if not, they finally called it for.
So
for the
are you
Republican.
saying, Tom, that there's a chance that the Democrats are going to aim their cheating into the wrong places, and they should be aiming them into
The
Virginia?
other thing I'm saying is that they've always cheated in Virginia.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
that we're used to this idea that, remember, they tried to meme into existence the idea that Florida was purple. Florida was never purple. It was never anything less than +4 Republican. Now it's +10, and it'll be reported as +6 because they have to keep the narratives alive. It's the same thing with Virginia. I don't believe that Virginia is +5 Democrat. I've never believed that. But what if it's, I don't know that it's red, right? But I know that it's not +5 Democrat. That's what I'm saying.
And I was at a dinner party the other night, and there was a couple people there with the cheating and the corruption election. I said, if we had a scale of 0 to 100 of how sure I was that the election was corrupted in a significant way, 100, I would bet my entire net worth against your dollar if we had the answer in an envelope right here conclusively of whether or not the election was corrupted in a significant manner. I'd bet every penny I had against it. It's unreasonable to think otherwise when you look at all the things that have come up. Bobby, do you agree with that sentiment as well? Maybe not 100, but do you agree with it too?
I do. I would say that I would be curious as to who's putting the answer in the envelope.
Well, no, I'm saying God put it in the envelope.
Yeah.
Just
No.
God. Yeah. And God we trust. All others need to verify.
I saw recently, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody put out there that they say, look, everybody in politics knows that the Democrats, what the Republican operatives call a margin of cheat, and they know they have to win by 3 or 4% in order to tie, because there's a certain level that they can't cheat past.
Right.
So, and they said that's widely accepted in Republican politics and not really denied in casual Democratic politics. And I just, I don't want to run around saying that they always cheat, even though in private I do, and I guess I just said it. But
nobody watches this show. Yeah. Don't worry about it.
It's just you end up in a situation where you're like, it's just not possible that you could fight against voter ID and fight against voter certification unless you want to cheat. I'm saying that as an Italian guy wearing an Italian shirt, right? To me, it's like, look, if I fight against something, it's because that something has an advantage from me.
Yeah.
Right. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
And basically, that's just human nature. It's not even red versus blue.
Can I change the topic real quick because we got about 2 minutes left? You mentioned something before. You said run by a bunch of pedos. This is something that I've learned from Dave Collum. He's a good friend of mine. I will go down any rabbit hole I feel like. Now.
That's fine. I'm good.
Try to cancel me. So this is one of the things I've been beating my head against the wall for about the last 6 months. Okay. Remember in 2016, all of us thought this crazy QAnon Pizzagate bullshit came out. And I'm like, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds crazy. As the years wore on, every domino in that whole thing began to fall, pointing to the fact that it's a true story. And now when you mention it to Democrats, they're like, yeah, but it wasn't run out of a pizza place. Who gives a flying shit if it was run out of a pizza place or not? We were talking about a court case that it was proven conclusively beyond a reasonable doubt. It was a criminal case that there was a high-level elite pedophile ring that we're not being allowed to see who was there. QAnon was 100% right. Am I wrong, or what is wrong with these people? Yeah. Run out of a dumpling.
I got nothing. Obviously, it doesn't. I mean, look. I put it this way in last month's issue of the newsletter. And actually, my partner Dexter White, when he was editing it, I said, "Ooh, that's harsh." I said, "So they're working really hard to make pedophilia a secret again."
Have you guys seen Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis?
Yeah, I have not actually, because watching a Spielberg flick about the Civil War, I can't do it.
It's not historically accurate, but Daniel Day-Lewis just plays Lincoln so well. He plays him like you hope Lincoln really was. Mm-hmm. But there's a scene at the end where they're asking him to confirm or deny something he knows to be true, and he writes a note and has it run back to Congress that says there's not a peace offer currently in front of me, nor do I expect there to be one. Now, the gist is that he delayed the people from coming to see him to deliver the peace offer. So he knows it's about to be delivered. And, you know, one of the Republican guy or Democratic guys goes, a lawyer's dodge, which is, he was exactly right. That's what it was. When you hear people, especially, what do we call them now? Legacy media, Jimmy. I love that term.
Oh, yeah, legacy's good. That's a good one.
Yeah, we like legacy media versus mainstream media, which just sounds like they've made you sound like a crazy person when you say it. Legacy media will say things like, there's absolutely no evidence of this happening, which does not mean it didn't happen.
Of course not.
Right.
You know, according to a criminal jury, there's no evidence that OJ killed his wife and Ron Goldman because they acquitted him. You know, but we all know he did it. Right? He wrote a book saying, if I did it, this is how I would have done it. You know what I mean? So that's when, to me, when you know you're lying, and you only hear like the CNN people and all that say, there's no evidence of election fraud. Well, there was also no evidence of Russia taking the side of Trump during the 2016 election.
They certainly ran with that fault.
But they sure as hell believe that.
Right.
So it's like that's where I fall on election meddling and all that. I mean, of course it happens. Just tell me there's no evidence, right? There's also no evidence in this current context that I'm 6'2".
Right.
All right.
How tall are you, Tom?
I'm 6'2".
I am. I'm 5'11" because I don't.
Really?
I don't know how to lie, right? And I couldn't come up with a good quip. Like I don't.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm 5'9". I mean,
it.
I'm lying. Obviously, I'm 5'9".
I lie and say I'm 5'9". Right, exactly. 5'9" is like regular height. If I was 5'9" and a little broader shoulders, I wouldn't feel like a little guy all the time, and I wouldn't be barking at people's heels. But I'm not.
I'm kind of a classic 5'11" brick shithouse style.
Perfect. That's a good size to be. Okay,
let's
let's call it.
One last sort of election question. I believe people are single issue voters, and my single issue is me. Do you understand why anybody thinks anything different than that? Like, why is it literally just TDS?
I think that people vote against their best interests all the time. But I think your best interest sometimes lies with the Democrats. They tend to have to stunt economic growth through regulations, so the Fed throws money at it, which ends up in rich people's pockets. I think that Barack Obama made me a metric crap ton of money by having this onerous regulatory environment causing the Fed to keep rates inorganically low for so long. So I don't agree. I rarely disagree with you, but I think my best interests are Democrats winning, and I never will vote for Democrats. Tom, you want to give the last word?
I don't like to vote because I don't like to encourage them. But in this particular election, I will vote again, third time for Trump, and they'll be and it's because in the long term interest, and that's the way I look at this stuff. Trump is clearly the right candidate. In the short term, he's clearly the right candidate.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah,
on this one, but it's not about but I don't vote my portfolio either. No. Like, because I don't really have one. I buy a bunch of gold and I stick it in the ground and I feed my dogs and.
By the way, he just made me switch back to agreeing with you because in the short and medium term, they make me money. But what I'm saying with the long term, that problem that could exist at the end of the tracks that the train is careening to, I don't want to get there with the Democrats. I like that answer.
Yeah. I have an 18-year-old daughter.
Yeah, exactly.
I do not want these people in power anymore because they want to draft her and send her into a shithole in Ukraine to fight for the Bank of England. And I'm saying no.
Yeah.
Period.
Okay. We got to have a whole nother visit by you to go over this Bank of England thing.
Yeah, I know. We don't have time. By the way, this has been the Futures Edge Show. I'm Jim Uriel. That's Bob Iacino. Tom Luongo. Guns, Goats. Gold, Goats, and Guns. Fabulous podcast. Fabulous Substack. Please look them up on Twitter. Where else can they find you?
Patreon, which is where that's how we make our living over on Patreon.
Okay. But by the way, none of this works without you guys and the support you guys give us, all the DMs, the retweets, the subscriptions. We appreciate every one of them. We also want to thank our sponsor, Hardcore Italians. By the way, this shirt that Bobby's wearing, the one that I'll be wearing next show, the material is fabulous too. If you're not Italian, that's great. I'm sure you have friends that are. Buy them. They're great gag gifts too. Bobby last time had a shirt on that just said Gnocchi. I thought that was one of my favorite shirts ever. Bobby and I were both in legacy media for many, many years. So I used legacy media for many, many years. We found out that you couldn't say what you actually thought because there was pressure from producers, pressure from sponsors, and it's a bullshit system. This is a much better system, but it doesn't work without your support. Support us by subscribing. Support us by buying shit from hardcoreitalians.com. Thank you. This is a Futures Edge.